Welcome back to Learning to DIY. I'm really excited about Screwdrivers Part 2. Shanks for joining me because we're going to be talking about the shanks of the screwdriver. Very poor dad joke. Okay, let's talk about where the shanks are formed, how they're formed, what materials they use, and go from there. Once we talk about how the shanks are formed, and just to verify with you guys, shanks are everything from the handle up to the tip. So in this case, this shank has a tip that's made out of the same material. And in some cases, the shank, it goes down to a certain point and a different material is used for the tip. So we're just going to talk about the shank portion. What is the shank? That's the handle to the tip. And, like I said, different tips sometimes. Okay, so how a shank is made. All of these have different manufacturers, obviously. So what gets dropped off to the manufacturer, the raw material for this, is called green wire. Green wire is not drawn to its final size. And green wire, it comes in like 3,000 pound coils. It could be something as big around as this. And I mean, it could be, it comes out of the steel factory. It's extruded out in a large size in coils. It's usually not that big, but it could be that big. Okay, so once it arrives, they pull this wire and they put it into a drawing machine. The drawing machine pulls or pushes the coil through a die, and the die, the die is gonna start out at a pretty good size, however big the wire is, and it's just gonna slowly get smaller and smaller until you get down to the size of the shank that you want to have. And a lot of times, there'll be a final extruding process to form a shape. Like this has a square shank. So some of them are multifaceted. So we'll talk about that later. But getting it through that drawing machine, reducing the aperture down to the proper size, and then we're going to harden it. And that's called an annealing process. And when it's annealed, you're heat treating it for tensile strength. So it's not at its hardest point at that point. You're going to bake all your shanks at the proper size. Basically, it's still wire at that point. You're going to bake the wire at 1350 degrees for 12 hours, and then it's going to be straightened, and then it's going to go through a cold forging process. So in the cold forging process, the first thing you're going to do is cut that wire into lengths. So as you can see, we have many different shaft lengths here. Some are shorter, some are longer, some are super short. So it could be as short as this or as long as this guy here. So once they're cut to length, the tip is formed. And like I said, this one is a tip that was formed at that time, and that may have been the same time that they got this shape, or if it was already hardened, it was probably already at this shape, because you don't want to heat treat again and again. You're never going to achieve the proper hardness that you want. You can watch some great knife making shows on Netflix or some kind of streaming service to see what I'm talking about. But basically, after the tip is formed, it forms wings. Wings are something you can't see in this screwdriver, but you might be able to see in this screwdriver, because this is transparent or translucent actually in the handle, and you can see that here's your tip, here's your shank, and then here inside the handle you can see part of that shank up into the handle, and it is slightly flattened on two sides at least to form little wings that help it stick into the handle. And In this case, you can tell that the handle was basically melted around it. You have those wings in there. Okay, so after you form the wings and the tip, you heat it back up to 1555 degrees. In most cases, that's the number you want to hit, and then oil quench it. And that's your final hardening at that point. Then it'll go through a nickel plating process. It has to be hand ground after that. So you go to a hand grinding station. There are probably thousands of shanks there. Somebody grabs one, they grind it down. You can see a lot better. You can see not as much here because it's been plated over, but you can see on the tip, you can see that grinding process. If you look at your screwdriver at home, you can see this one, it's a little easier to see where that tip starts to form way up here and it's ground down to here. Now, this one, obviously, they put a different tip on it. I'm not sure about that process on how they do that. I assume that the shank that they built originally went down to here. It probably had a place to insert this or make that out of a different material. Sometimes it's just coated in a different metal. But like in this case, you can see that they made a round shaft, a round shank, and it probably fit. They probably fit this in as a separate piece. So that happens as well. Sometimes you just get where it ends in a 1/4 inch socket, or well, 1/4 inch hex, so that you can put in bits and that sort of thing. And some of these do not go through that entire process. I have to say, some of them are really, really bad. This piece of metal here, it feels like pot metal. It feels like almost maybe even aluminum. So there are really bad quality shanks out there as well. But a good screwdriver will go through that process and go through nickel plating, hand grinding. Then that's not the end. And then it is chemically milled, and then there's like a flash bath of nickel on top of that. And some of these have even gone beyond that. You can see like this is also chrome plated. So they have a chrome plating on top of that. And so when you see something saying chrome vanadium steel on your screwdriver, that's usually just the coating on the shank, because you want the shank to be made of steel. So they usually don't advertise them that way unless they're like a foreign company, not USA made. You might see that. Most of the screwdriver manufacturers want you to know that this is the hardest steel with a little bit of malleability in there, because you have to have that, otherwise it makes it brittle. So you go through the strengthening process, and then the electrical chrome plating will have it happen on some. Like this, for instance, is meant to have several pieces fit into the shank, and we will talk about that. So that is chrome plated because it's not as important as this part, because that's where your strength lies. This is chrome plated. This one is probably stopped at that nickel process. So let's talk then about corrosion resistance. That's one of the reasons that they go through this process, especially with the nickel plating, is to prevent corrosion. And the way it fits into the handle is an important part, because that could create weak points. So weakness and strength is what it's all about. So we'll talk about the shanks that are here. Obviously, this one has the shank that goes up just a little ways into the screwdriver. Those can break. I have seen the plastic screwdriver handle break. This one, it probably has little wings in there. It looks like this was formed around it. And there are two different types of plastic here. The hard tool plastic is probably what it sits in. And then you have kind of a rubberized plastic around it. But we'll talk about some that I actually have specific information on. Mainly, we'll start with this channel lock. And the channel lock shank is a tri-alloy steel. So I'm not really sure. They do not reveal their processes in a lot of ways, but they call it a tri-alloy steel. And they vacuum heat treat it. So when they do the heat treating, the heating and the quenching, that's done in a vacuum. And somehow they advertise that because they think that really makes that steel a lot stronger when they heat treat it in a vacuum. It is a polished, non-porous material. That may be part of it too. If you're doing it in a vacuum, maybe that prevents it from being porous. I'm not quite sure. Another one I wanted to talk about is the Klein. This is a carbon steel barrel. And so that it is a barrel, which means that this comes out. This has 2 tips on it. And that barrel, if you can see, it's just a 1/4 inch hole for this to fit into. And so that's what they advertise it as, a carbon steel barrel. And obviously this went through the nickel and chrome plating process so to make it shiny. The Husky. Husky, they just say it's steel. So I'm assuming this went through the regular process. And it looks like that has the nickel finish. I'm assuming, I'm not really sure. I mean, you can see the difference between this really like shiny chrome versus like this is more of a nickel finish. It's not quite refined, not quite smooth. So I'm assuming that's a nickel finish when it's not quite as smooth. Let's talk about the WIA. I actually had some feedback from my last video regarding WIA. These are German made. So let's start with this one. This shank, actually, it's pretty cool. It's a hex shank, which means it has 6 sides. And so you can actually, if you're trying to stick this in something and you're having a hard time turning it, you can put a lot of downward pressure on the handle and get it where you want to. And you can actually put a wrench on this or you know, pliers and turn it while you're putting the pressure down. Here you have a different size hex, so you can actually like put this through a open end, or not open end, but like through a box end wrench. You can get it up here. If you know you're going to have to put a lot of pressure on it. I mean, this is tough stuff. This is WIA is a good brand made in Germany, so you're going to be able to really put the pressure on it, and then use these the hex handle and the hex shank. So you can see that this is a separate hex piece and then this. So this hex piece, the larger hex piece, goes into the handle, and that's probably where it's molded into and held. And then this shaft, this shank, actually probably fits into this and is solid in there. So it does present a point of extra weakness, but if this is strong, if this is so strong that it can withstand a tool being put on it and turned, you know, if it breaks, man, most of these have a lifetime warranty, and we'll talk about that too. But most screwdrivers, if you break one and you contact the manufacturer, it's kind of rare that they would deny any kind of coverage on that. So anyway, this is a very solid shank. And then the other WIA, it's a little bit different. You do have a black oxide. Evidently this entire shank underneath this plastic layer is black oxide to prevent corrosion. So that way if you get moisture in there or something like that, it's not going to create issues. So because of the black oxide coating prevents corrosion. This is what they call an insulated shank, and this is primarily for electricians, and they will test this up to 10,000 volts to make sure that it's not going to electrocute the user if they are, if they have the tip in somewhere and they're doing work. Electricians, always have these on hand that are insulated so that they don't get shocked. They're tested to 10,000 volts, but they will never say that they're certified or rated for 10,000 volts. They'll say they're rated for 1,000 volts because they always test them at 10 times the amount that they might have to go through. So there are VDE testing standards. I don't know what these acronyms stand for. I didn't look it up. But VDE, EN/IEC, so EN/IEC, ASTM, or CSP. And I assume these are all different electrical standards that any insulated screwdriver has to go through. None of these other ones have to worry about. This one I'm kind of curious about because it has the metal tip, and you can tell that this is plastic molded. It's like hard tool plastic molded around the shank. And so I don't know if this is electrical rated, although it does have little icons on there. So if anybody knows what the icons mean, I see where it says, oh, wear safety glasses, don't hammer on it, that kind of thing. So that's another different kind of shaft. Another kind of shank is the barrel shank that we talked about before, but sometimes it's faceted. So as you can see, this has a transparent or translucent handle, at least part of it is, so you can see that the wings are actually inset, etched wings to keep this in place. And then it's a barrel that will fit these. This is a separate shank that fits inside a shank. so you got the best of both worlds. And we'll go over these. This is a 13-in-1. So this shank also has, each of these two ends will have another piece that you can take out. Well, this will drive a nut at a certain size, while these are different bits. So you can turn it around, and then these come out. It's like a Russian nesting doll. And, there's another size barrel for another nut driver, and you can turn it around and put a flathead in instead of a Phillips. It goes right back in here. And these are called detents, these little balls, and they're springy, and they help hold it in. So some of them are held in with magnets. Some of them are held in with detents, little detent balls. There's a bigger one here so that it will fit in. Okay, so that is another kind of shank. Then you have something like this. This shank obviously has a separate tip, and the tip is different from the rest of the shank. And this part of the shank has what they call knurling. Knurling is going to help you get a grip with a wrench or pliers, something to help turn this, because this is a vessel. We talked about this before. The tip is JIS, so it is not going to cam out. So you can put a lot of pressure on it and turn it with a wrench or pliers and really torque a screw. All right, and then we're going to talk about one more here, and it's really just the design of the shank. Obviously, it's chrome plated. Obviously, it's a barrel. Same thing, same concept. This one has more tips with it, but it's interesting because there is, and this is not the only screwdriver that has this. This is a shank that turns and ratchets, and we'll talk about ratcheting screwdrivers more when we compare them and test them against each other. But a lot of these ratchet, and some of them have this cone shape, and the cone shape I think it really helps a lot of dust and debris, go away from the handle down here, so that you don't end up clogging up this mechanism. These generally are very difficult, if you can even take them apart, difficult to take apart. You should keep them somewhat lubricated, though, if you can. Some of them are completely sealed. Some of them you can get some lubricant in there, but each one of those, you get either something like this that's a 14-in-1, or like this is a 15-in-1. There's an 11-in-1, 10-in-1. There's all different kinds, and that just means that they're going to have different bits. The other interesting thing about this one, which this is also a vessel, and so it's a JIS screwdriver, but this shank actually has another function. You can actually take the shank off and it becomes a mini screwdriver that still ratchets. So yeah, so this ratchets as a stubby, and we haven't talked about stubbies, but that we're going to talk about those in our specialties. But yeah, that is cool. So you have ratcheting. The only difference between this one is this tip is permanent. It's set in there. You're not going to be able to switch this out for a flathead, smaller or larger Phillips. This is solid. So it's a solid steel shank that goes all the way up here, and then this pulls off, and you can see that's a nickel-plated hex driver. And so you can just put another bit on there. It does not come with extra bits, so you'll have to get your own. But that is a pretty cool feature. But most of them have a collar. The collar on this one is up here at the end of the shank. This one, the shank goes through the collar, and you can move that for a ratcheting screwdriver. On a basic one, it's just going to go right into the handle. It's just going to right in. Now, some of these shanks stop, just like this one. Goes in a little ways and then stops. Some of them go all the way through the entire handle, and actually this metal cap fits on top of the shank. That's the entire length, and the handle is around it. And they call that through tang, because when you're talking about knives or swords, the entire blade going all the way through the handle. So basically, you just have a cushion between yourself and the entire knife or entire blade. In this case, it's the same thing, but with a screwdriver. So that's the breakdown, basically, of different shanks. It's interesting to see how many of these different kinds of things they've created for all different purposes. And there's more than this, but this is what I have. You can obviously see an advantage to a square shank or a hex shank, such as this. This is a hex shank. You're able to help get another tool in to turn it, whereas the round ones, obviously you can do it down here, but like a basic round one, you're not going to be able to get another tool on there to help you out. But that is pretty much it for the shanks today. Really appreciate you guys joining me, sticking with me through the screwdriver series, screwdrivers, through this thing that I'm doing. Hope you guys enjoy it. Let me know if you have any more feedback. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. If you have more knowledge on your manufacturing process, or if you have favorites, or if there's something that you're not seeing here that you'd like to see. I do have my eye on a couple that I do not have yet. So we'll probably review those when they come up or come in, if I order them. So thanks, guys. Thanks for learning with me. I really appreciate it.